Kyoto last train nightmare. I'm never riding it again. The humid Kyoto air clung to me like a shroud as I sprinted toward the station. 12:18. Damn it. My usual train was gone. I glanced at the digital board. The last train, the one Aiko warned me about, was scheduled to depart in 7 minutes. Aiko, my star pupil, quiet with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge. She'd practically begged me not to take the last train. "Sensei, it's not clean," she'd said, her voice barely a whisper. Something about restless spirits, the Akari, trapped between worlds, forever riding the rails. I'd laughed it off, chalking it up to local superstition. Now, staring at the looming deadline, I regretted my dismissal. I was tired, bone-deep tired, after grading endless stacks of essays on the proper use of the present perfect tense. I just wanted to get home. The platform was nearly deserted. A few scattered figures huddled on the benches, their faces obscured by shadows. An old man in a rumpled salaryman suit coughed into his hand. A young couple whispered and giggled. A girl, probably a student, was glued to her phone, earbuds blasting. And then there was the old woman sitting ramrod straight, clutching a worn doll dressed in a traditional kimono. Her eyes, though aged, were sharp and unsettling as they focused on me. The train pulled in, its doors hissing open with a sigh. It was cleaner than usual, almost sterile. An unnatural quiet hung in the air. Stepping inside, I chose a seat near the back, trying to ignore the prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The train lurched forward. The lights flickered momentarily, then stabilized. I pulled out my phone, hoping to distract myself with some mindless scrolling, but the signal was weak. Great, just my luck. At the next stop, a few more passengers boarded 2 salarymen, already drunk and boisterous, and a teenager with a defiant scowl and headphones clamped over his ears. The salarymen stumbled into seats across from me, their slurred voices filling the car. One of them kept staring, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. Gaijin, he mumbled, the word heavy with disdain. "What you doing here so late?" I ignored him, focusing on the passing scenery outside the window. But the scenery was wrong. Buildings seemed distorted, elongated, their shapes subtly off. The familiar streets of Kyoto were replaced by something alien, unsettling. The train stopped again, longer this time. The silence was broken only by the rhythmic hum of the ventilation system and the salaryman's drunken ramblings. I glanced at the old woman. She was still sitting perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the doll. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were whispering to it. "Mr. Tanaka, the salaryman I often saw on my morning commute, boarded the train. He looked ill. His face was pale and gaunt, his suit rumpled and stained. He slumped into the seat next to me. Long night, I said, trying to make conversation. He didn't respond immediately. He just stared straight ahead, his eyes glazed over. Then he turned to me, his voice a raspy whisper. "Don't look away." What, I asked, confused. He didn't elaborate. He just repeated the phrase, his voice growing weaker with each repetition. "Don't look away. Don't look away." The train lurched forward again, more violently this time. The lights flickered again, and a strange smell filled the car, something metallic and acrid, like old blood. The salarymen across from me had stopped talking. They were staring blankly ahead, their eyes wide and unfocused. The train conductor's voice crackled over the intercom, but the announcement was garbled and distorted, barely intelligible. His tone, however, was wrong. It was flat, emotionless, almost robotic. I looked at the conductor through the glass of his cabin. He was standing perfectly still, his face frozen in a grotesque smile. His eyes were black and empty. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to calm myself. It was just stress, exhaustion. I was imagining things, but when I opened my eyes, things were worse. The advertisements lining the walls of the train car had changed. They were now written in Japanese characters I couldn't understand, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift before my eyes. The temperature in the car had dropped dramatically. I could see my breath fogging in the air. I pulled out my phone again, desperately trying to call Kenji, my only friend in Kyoto, an Aussie expat who worked in IT. No signal, still. Mr. Tanaka coughed violently, a rattling sound that seemed to shake his entire body. He clutched his chest, gasping for air. His skin was now a sickly gray. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me, his eyes filled with terror. "They're coming," he whispered. "They're always coming." He slumped back in his seat, his eyes closing. He didn't move again. Panic began to set in. I had to get off this train. I stood up, intending to pull the emergency stop cord, but I hesitated. Everyone was staring at me. The young couple, the teenager, the old woman with the doll. Their eyes were all locked on me, their faces expressionless. The train conductor's voice crackled over the intercom again. This time the announcement was clear, spoken in perfect English. "Welcome home." A cold hand gripped my arm. I turned to see the old woman. Her eyes were now completely black. She smiled, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. The doll in her lap seemed to be staring directly at me. I ripped my arm away from her grasp and stumbled toward the front of the train. The conductor was still standing there, his smile unwavering. He didn't react as I approached. "Let me off this train," I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. He didn't respond. He just continued to stare, his eyes empty and soulless. I pounded on the glass of his cabin, but it didn't even rattle. It was like hitting solid rock. The train began to slow down. It screeched to a halt in the middle of a dark tunnel. The lights flickered and died, plunging the car into complete darkness. A collective gasp filled the car. Then a low chanting began, a guttural sound that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I could feel them moving closer, the other passengers, their presence like a suffocating weight. I could hear their breathing, ragged and shallow. A hand touched my face, cold and clammy. I recoiled in horror. The lights flickered back on, revealing a scene of unimaginable terror. The passengers were all standing, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Their faces were contorted into grotesque masks of pain and despair. The conductor was standing in front of me, his smile wider than ever. He reached out a skeletal hand. I screamed. I pushed him away, stumbling backward. I saw an emergency exit and threw myself against it, struggling to pry it open. The chanting grew louder, more intense. The passengers were closing in, their hands reaching for me. I finally managed to force the emergency exit open. A blast of cold, stale air hit me in the face. Without hesitation, I jumped. I landed hard on the tracks, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly into the darkness of the tunnel, the sound of the train receding behind me. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until I couldn't run anymore. I collapsed against the tunnel wall, gasping for air. The tunnel was dark and damp, filled with the stench of decay. I could hear the dripping of water and the scurrying of rats. I eventually found a maintenance hatch and managed to pry it open. I climbed out into a deserted street in a part of Kyoto I didn't recognize. The buildings were old and crumbling, their windows boarded up. The air was thick with an oppressive silence. I stumbled through the streets, disoriented and terrified, until I finally found a familiar landmark. From there, I was able to make my way back to my apartment. I collapsed on my bed, shaking uncontrollably. I tried to convince myself it was all a nightmare, a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But the unsettling details lingered. The distorted scenery, the strange smell, the unchanging smile of the conductor, the glowing eyes of the passengers. I finally managed to fall asleep, but my dreams were filled with images of the last train, its passengers, and the old woman with the doll. I woke up the next morning, feeling drained and exhausted. I checked my phone. There was a text message from Aiko. "I told you not to ride the last train," it read. "Now they know your name." I looked out my window. I could see the train tracks below. In the distance, I saw the faint glimmer of the last train approaching. It was moving slowly, deliberately, as if it were coming for me. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the inevitable.